All right, so I know that this is not the most convenient way for some of my students who are hoping to just listen in on one session, but I'm live again because I go ahead and upload the last couple of chapters and get that going. And I'm here to start chapter 12 with you. So we are on the Coffin Quilt. If you've been reading along, we are reading the Coffin Quilt by Anne Rinaldi. And we just finished up chapter 11 where Fanny shares a little bit about old Yeller thing and that superstition and that haint that keeps coming and following her around. And Ro confesses to her little sister that she is pregnant. And so she and Jaunce are having a baby, and she thinks that everything's going to be perfect. So chapter 12, page 76. Follow along. Ro went to Stringtown to talk to Aunt Betty. She brought gifts, a jar of fruit vinegar, and some crabapple jelly. You don't visit hereabouts without bringing something from your larder. Do you want me to get word to Jaunce about the baby? I asked. It was early of a morning, the whispery part, where even the birds speak in hushed voices. No time, she said. I'll make time. He should know, Ro. Isn't right that his not knowing. Is she going to keep it from him then? He and his family are off timbering, she said. It was the old of the moon, a good time for timbering, a good time for cutting hay too, which is where Pa and my brothers had gone at first light. It never cut on the new of the moon because the sap was still in the hay and it'd take longer to dry. My family planted and harvested by the signs. The rules for this are simple. You plant in the fruitful signs of Scorpio. Oh gosh, guys, I don't know how to pronounce all these. Is it Pisces? I think it is. Scorpio, Pisces, Taurus, or Cancer. I admit, I don't even know what I am. Never been one for the astrological signs. You plow in Aries. You plant flowers in Libra when the moon is in the first quarter. It goes on like that, and you doesn't go against the rules, or corn will have small ears, potatoes will get nubs, and if you kill a hog in the growing parts of the moon and the meat gets all puffy. Lots of town people hoot about this, but it works for us, so we keep doing it. I had to go to school to Aunt Betty's with Ro. All day I thought about her, about that little bitty baby growing inside of her, and her having to find someplace to stay, because Pa would go crazy if he found out about it. She knew that as well as I did. All that jabber about the baby bringing people together was so much sassafras. I half wished Aunt Betty would say no, that Ro couldn't live with her. She still had 3 young'uns at home, and it'd be a bad example for them having Ro around her not being wet and all, wouldn't it? But I knew the answer to that one, too. Aunt Betty was the kindest creature around these parts who ever drew breath. She was a true Christian, good to everybody. She never talked about sin or hellfire. She just went about in her sweet way, and her door was open to anyone who was in need. So I wasn't surprised when Ro came home in 2 days, laden with blackberry jelly, huckleberry puffs, big pudding, and the news that she was moving in with Aunt Betty. She told that at supper. Pa said nothing because he never spoke to her. Ma just blinked. Leaving us again, Ro? Now, why? I waited for my sister to tell him about the baby. And the next moment, silent except for the clinking of forks, I saw Alifair watching her, just like a fox. And it came to me. Alifair suspected about the baby. Oh, how she'd love to know. She couldn't wait for Ro to do something more to fall farther from grace. She'd be the first one to hop up from the table and move Ro's pebble on Ma's rock to the side of the damned. And after it had been moved back to the side of the saved, too. I just feel like a burden here, Ro said. Ken are never a burden, Ma reminded her. I know, Ro said softly, but things are disquieted since I'm home, and I have no right to disquiet this family. Everyone waited for Pa to say something then, But my sister might as well have been speaking in tongues for all the mind Paul said to her. He wasn't about to break his silence nohow. So Ro packed her things and left the next day for Aunt Betty's in Stringtown. She took the coffin quilt with her. "You're the only one who knows about the baby," she told me before she left. "I expect you to keep my secret long as it can be kept." I'd die before I told. I'd let myself be hauled into the woods by Yeller Thing. Didn't she know that? Things quieted down somewhat after she took her leave, but I missed her sore bad. Does Ma suspect the real reason, I wondered? Had to get up awful early in the morning for her. I decided to test her. "I'm so sad Ro had to leave us," I said one day while helping out in the kitchen. "Aren't you, Ma?" We were alone. I'd never say such if Alifair was around. When I was alone with Ma, she sometimes said things she wouldn't say around the others. Now she said something I wish I hadn't been privy to. "You know what we believe, Fanny," she said, "that God predestines all things good and bad, that the bad is for God's purpose, that it serves some good. All evil brings out the good in people." I reckon it was right about then that I stopped being a primitive Baptist, if I ever was one. I didn't see what good could come out of Paul's not talking to my sister, of Rose having a baby, and the father not knowing it, of her having to live with Aunt Betty because she knew her family wouldn't have her under their roof if they knew of it. I never spoke to Ma about it again. We did our chores, went to school, to church. The colors in the woods deepened, the nights grew cold, frost covered everything in the mornings. In church one Sunday, the preacher said the end was at hand. "We're in the last evening of time," he said. "As far as when the end comes, Scripture tells us even the angels in heaven won't know. But I do believe we're in the evening of time, and we'd all best prepare for it." They don't fool around in our church. They get right to things. But at least we're not as bad as the people who handle snakes to prove that God is looking out for them. I like to think that we don't need to handle snakes to prove God loves us. Or stand around getting the jim jams about being consumed in fire. I like to think about God as somebody kind and loving. Somebody who'd like my sister Rose baby right off. Maybe give it dimples, even though she wasn't married to John Hatfield when she was having it. Anyways, things seemed to settle down after Ro left, or so I thought. But I soon found different. I soon found that once evil gets into your house, it slithers around there like a cold mist. Sometimes even hides in the corners. But it's there once you let it in, and you can't get shut of it. How did it get in? With that coffin quilt of Rose. That quilt smelled of evil. And I think Mrs. Hatfield gave it to Rose so the evil could touch her and us. Anyways, evil doesn't lie still too long, any more than a hoop snake. After a week or two, things started happening real fast, too. It started the day I rode over to Aunt Betty's to see Ro. That was the day I found out she'd put her own name on one of the little coffins on the edge of the coffin quilt. And if that wasn't enough, it was the day Johns came to visit. Chapter 13, Fall 1880. "I'm scared, Floyd," I said. My brother looked up from his carving. He was making a baby cradle. Wood shavings were all around his feet. On the shelf in front of a big window sat little horses, bows and arrows, some corn guns, and a wooden dancing bear. The place smelled of wood and wood shavings. I watched his strong hands caress the wood, testing it for smoothness. He often made cradles for people. Was this one for Ro? Did he know about her baby? Might be he did. She came to talk to him, too, here in his little cabin when the notion took her. But if it was for Ro, he'd never say. And I wouldn't ask. "I heard a mourning dove last night," I told him. "Ma says they only call when there's somebody to mourn. I'm a-going to see Ro today. and I'm scared of what I'll find. He eyed me from beneath long lashes. Women went crazy over when he went to dances and such. Seen any turtle doves of late? He asked. Saw one this morning. Know what that means, don't you? That somebody loves you and sent the turtle dove to tell you. Likely he was bringing a message to Ro from John's. Why'd he come here, not go to Aunt Betty's? Likely nobody told him she wasn't here anymore. Floyd wasn't spoiling for a fight with the Hatfields like most other McCoys. He liked to live peaceable with everybody. Besides, both McCoys and Hatfields bought his toys. Bill's Pebble's on the damn side of Ma's Rock, I said. I could talk to Floyd about such things, being as he held himself a bit away from the family. He loved them and would never let me badmouth them, but he wouldn't let them hold sway over him either. That's because he went hunting last Sunday and never came for a meeting. Do you think he's damned? No. Do you think the devil is wagering for Ro's soul, like Paul says? No more than he's wagering for everybody else's. I felt everything inside me settling. After today, it's likely my pebble will be with Bill's. He raised one eyebrow. They don't know you're going to see her? No, which is why I couldn't bring her anything from the house. I wish I had something to bring her. He reached around and fumbled behind him for a moment. He took something from a shelf and handed it to me. It was small, round, and smooth. A stone? I said. Not just a stone, a mad stone, taken from the stomach of a deer. It can draw poison from a snake bite. The stone lay warm in my hand. I rubbed my fingers over it. Thank you, Floyd. I'll be sending her something else soon, he said. I nodded. You won't be telling where I went today if they ask? Course not. Go on with you and be careful in the woods. Verdi, Viola, and Maylene, Aunt Betty's 3 girls, weren't home, thank heaven. I'd never liked them. They were a bit younger than Ro, not married yet and smitten with men. All they did was fuss over themselves and make new dresses. I know they didn't like Ro because she was purtier than all 3 of them put together. Aunt Betty hugged me and gave me a glass of buttermilk and some fresh cookies to take outside, where Ro was sitting under the mimosa tree sewing. Glad somebody's coming to see her, she whispered. She's pining away for home. I could tell she was worried about Ro because Aunt Betty baked when she worried. Now wisps of gray-white hair framed her round, pleasant face. The kitchen was hot and full of cakes and pies. She must have been baking all morning. Is she still working on that coffin quilt, Aunt Betty? She's right now sewing a coffin on the edge for her baby, she said. I know that some people in these parts use such quilts as family records, but it's downright tempting fate to put a baby coffin on one. Go on and talk to her. Your sunny little face will do her good, honey. I knew my face wasn't sunny. Neither was I. But I went out to the row, setting the milk and cookies down on a wooden bench. How you feeling, Ro? She stopped stitching and looked past me dreamily. Do you know that there's a little creek down there named the Devil's Jump? It's all full of boulders and rocks and such. They say the devil passed by here with his apron full of rocks. He proposed to burn in the land with them, but his apron string busted and he dropped the rocks right there in the creek. It wasn't like Ro to set store in tales about the devil, like most people in these mountains did. She was brooding. How you coming with the quilt? I asked. It'll be done soon. That's a mighty little coffin there. Who's it for? She smiled. A baby. Afore it's born? You know, Paul said he didn't want any McCoy names on that quilt. He's not here, is he? Anyway, it's not for the baby. When it comes, I'll put its name there and date of birth. It's a record of sorts. See here? Here's a little coffin for the little one Johnson's mother is expecting. A chill went through me. Got a present from you from Floyd. I gave her the Madstone. She took it up, smiled, and held it in her hand. It's warm from his touch. It holds the warmth of the person who takes it from the stomach of the deer, you know. That's right nice of Floyd. Thank him for me. How's things to home? I shrugged. Same. They know you're here today? No, but you know, I'm always allowed to wander free on Saturday as I please. I'd rather you visit me than anybody, she said. And since you've come, there's a promise I want from you, Fanny. I felt a sense of doom, like the sun just left the heavens. What? I know you don't like this quilt, but that's just because you don't understand it. Promise me that if anything ever happens to me or my baby, you'll move our coffins to the center and make sure my baby's name and date of birth and death get put on right. I stared at my beautiful sister. I'd heard people talk of how women who were expecting a baby got all kinds of strange notions and had to be humored. Was this one of them? Or was Rose suddenly getting strange in the head? Why should anything happen to you or your baby? I asked. Just promise me you'll do as I ask, Fanny, and then keep the quilt forever. A chilly breeze stirred the branches of the mimosa tree. From the kitchen came Aunt Betty singing. Queen Jane was the song. I knew of it. Calvin explained how it told how Henry VIII, who had his wives' heads cut off, followed Jane Seymour, one of them, to the grave, and how lots of our songs are handed down from the old world, from England. He said that's why we say things like "afeard," because Shakespeare did too. We're reading Shakespeare in class. What is it called when you reference something famous? An allusion. Roe was waiting for me to answer, but I recollected what Tolbert had told me once. Don't ever be pushed into a promise. Say you'll study on it. I'll study on it, I told her. Did she hear me? Of a sudden, someone whistled, clear and sharp on the fall air from the direction of Devil's Jump. Rose stood. The quilt tumbled from her lap. It's Johns! I knew he'd come. I knew he couldn't stay away. I watched her fly across the grass down to the creek. I sat there munching Aunt Betty's sugar cookies. The coffin quilt had landed on my lap. We're going to start chapter 14, page 87, fall of 1880. This is the last chapter we're going to read tonight. I spied on them. Those are the only words to put on what I did that day when Roe met John's Hatfield near Devil's Jump. I hid behind some rocks that the devil had dropped conveniently when his apron string busted and listened to what they said to each other. After they finished hugging and kissing, that is. And they did that for some time. I thought they'd never stop. But finally they did, and that's when I listened. He told her how he'd heard she was here. He asked her why. She told him it was because she just couldn't live under Paul's roof with his hate creeping around her like a ginseng vine around a tree. And I haven't even told you about the baby yet. That's when Johns broke loose from her and looked like he'd just been hit by one of the boulders dropped from the devil's apron. Baby? He asked. You can picture what followed. Lots more hugging and kissing, which was only proper, I reckon. Ro got all shy then, like she never got with anybody, and I wondered if the devil was indeed wagering for her soul. Can we go into the house and talk? He asked. No, she said. Wouldn't be fair to Aunt Betty if she let you in, being as we're not wed. She's courting gossip, just let me stay with her. All right, he said, we'll talk here. It isn't that I'm not happy about the baby, Ro. How couldn't I be? We've got to do something. I don't want my child a woods colt. What'll we do? She asked. They studied on the matter, like there was all kinds of things for them to do when both knew there was only one. Get hitched. And both knew how impossible it was. Do you think we could? She asked. John shook his head. Onlyest way is if we ran off. Got shut of this place and everybody around here. And how would we live? Ro asked. There'd be nobody to help us raise a house or give us a start. You know how important that is, Johns. And neither one of us has got a penny to our names. They brooded some more. We'll figure a way, he said. And next time I come, I'll have an answer. I promise you, darling. I'll be back next week. Meet me here by this creek. 1 week from today. I got out from behind that old boulder then and crept away. Back to the mimosa tree, all the while trying to figure out how to help them. It wasn't right they couldn't wed. I knew that. Young as I was, just the same as I knew that you wash your head with apple vinegar if you get cooties. Ro didn't talk much for the rest of our visit. Just went back to work on that old coffin quilt of hers like nothing had happened. She sure was set on stitching that baby's little black coffin down firm. Aunt Betty asked me to stay for supper, but I said no. I had to get home. I could stay away in the woods just so long, even on a Saturday, without having to explain where I was. Can I come back next Saturday? I asked Ro. I didn't want her to run off with Johns without me knowing it. She said yes, and made no connection to Johnson's coming again. It was like she was someplace else in her head and didn't even know I was leaving. I must have been someplace else in my head, too, not to reckon that Johns could pay a visit to my sister without word getting around like a brush fire. By the time I came to the supper table with my whole family knew he'd been there. My brothers, Bill and Bud, brought the news. They'd been to Stringtown that morning to the general store run by Harlan Meeker to get some coffee beans for Ma. I loved my brothers, but I didn't believe the story. Why, to Stringtown, when we had a right proper general store here and Mr. Randolph sometimes gave us goods on trade? Nah, I didn't believe a word of how they just happened to run into Johns and stood jawing with him a while, real friendly like. I think my brothers were snooping like bloodhounds. My family can be awful sneaky sometimes. What's Johnson's doing in Stringtown? Pa asked. Maybe buying coffee beans, Alifair said. She got right uppity sometimes, and Pa let her, 'cause she was the oldest girl, and he said she had common sense and depended on her. He was to see Ro, Pa said, and by Jehoshaphat, I won't abide it. He slapped his hand on the table, and we all got quiet. I'd been quiet all along, of course. Scared somebody would know I'd been to see her this day. Not gonna have it, Pa was ranting. He's seen the last of my daughter, that little white maggot. I felt Alifair staring at me, like she knew I'd seen Ro that afternoon. Her eyes looked downright queer, like she was looking right into my soul. And I began to believe that she did have powers, like Ma said. I kept my eyes down on my plate because I didn't want to face her power just then, whatever it was. Tell you what I want, boys, Pa said to Bud and Bill. Want you both to go to Stringtown next Saturday and keep an eye on that little white maggot. He'll be timbering with his paw all week, but sure as God made apples, he'll be on the prowl again next Saturday. If you sense he's on his way to see Ro, come tell me. I'll get Jim to arrest him. He's deputy sheriff. It's his job to arrest people who seduce innocent young girls. It was the first time since Ro had run off with Johns that he'd spoken of her as innocent. Would my brother Jim really arrest Johns? Could he arrest him? What did seduce mean? Had Johns done something terrible to Ro that I didn't know about? If so, why had they clung together at Devil's Jump today like the devil was coming back again with his apron full of stones? Alifair was staring at me again. I quickly looked down. She could wither my spirit, that girl, if she tried hard enough. Don't you think somebody ought to go over and warn Ro that Johns is sneaking around? Ma asked. I'm sure she doesn't want to see him anymore. If she did, why would she be hiding out at Aunt Betty's? Young as I was, sometimes I thought that my ma had too much religion, that it addled her brain. Pa stopped shoving food in his mouth long enough to stare at her. You telling me, Sarah, that our daughter doesn't want to see him anymore? She was mighty put out with him for not going against old devil Ants and marrying her, Rennell. I know that much. I think she should be warned. Haven't we had enough tribulation in this family? Pa nodded and allowed that we had. If they knew about the baby, they'd know about tribulation, I thought. They'd be out hunting jaunts right now with repeater rifles. Nobody knew, except me, maybe Floyd, and we weren't telling. Of a sudden, I lost my taste for the food, worrying for Ro. Suppose next Saturday my brother Jim did arrest Johns. I had to warn Ro somehow. I started planning how while my family fussed all around me, I prayed sitting there, "Dear Lord, show me the way." And then, for some reason, maybe it was blind luck like happens to you sometimes, God answered my prayers. Pa decided Ro should be warned, and that I was the one to do it. "I have to take a day off from school," I said. "No," Pa decreed. "It can wait. Johns won't be on the prowl till Saturday." Alifair objected, of course, but this time Pa hushed her. I was Ro's favorite, he reminded her. Only ones she trusted right now were me and Ma, and he wasn't about to send Ma on a child's errand. So that's how I got to be on the scene when my brother Jim came to arrest Johns Hatfield. And we acquired more tribulation in our family. Or as my brother Tolbert would say, all hell broke loose. That concludes Chapter 14 of The Coffin Quilt by Anne Rinaldi. We will resume reading as a class, Chapter 15, tomorrow. We can decide what time. I'm thinking like 7 works pretty well for me. So maybe 7 or 7:30. So we'll talk about it tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like my video and subscribe to my channel so you can get updates on when I go live to read you our novel. Right now, it's The Coffin Quilt. Thank you guys so much for being patient with me while I figure out YouTube too. It's all good, right? Hope you have a great evening. See you tomorrow. Bye.